Well, happy Hanukkah from the Rood Crew, from A Rood Awakening, and from Michael Rood to you. We thank you for joining us for this special event. Lots to know about Hanukkah, where it comes from, the history of it, and if you have a Bible with the book of Maccabees in it, as I do at home, an old Catholic Bible still has it in it. It's a great and wonderful and rich history of Hanukkah, and even if you don't have that in it, you can look in the Gospels and see where Yeshua and his disciples in winter went to the porch of Solomon, or Solomon's porch in the temple. That is a hint that that is Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah all about, and where have we gone from the original temple to now? And with the Jewish people, where are we now with the Jewish people and the return of Yeshua and the first coming of Yeshua, of the Messiah as they see it? Where are we with all of this? Someone who can help us to understand this is Reuven Prager, joining us from Israel today. Reuven, welcome to Hanukkah.
Shalom from Jerusalem. Thank you for having me.
Certainly. Now, you told me something briefly about Judaism 3.0. Now, obviously, when we talk about 3.0, we're talking about, well, there must have been a 1.0 and a 2.0. Can you just give us a basic idea of what we're speaking of when we talk about Judaism 3.0 with your work in Israel?
For sure. Hanukkah means dedication or rededication. And we have a verse that says, Chadesh Yameinu Kikedem, restore our days as of yore. If we look at Jewish history over the last 3,000 years, the first period of Jewish history was the period where we came out of Egypt and we came to the land of Israel and we built the first temple. It was destroyed. We built the second temple and it was destroyed. And that could be considered Judaism 1.0, the period where the Jewish people were in the land of Israel. We were serving God in the holy temples, the first temple and second temple, and we were a land-based, temple-based religion. When the Romans destroyed the second temple in the year 70 and took us out into exile, that began the period of Judaism 2.0, where they had to recreate Judaism, whereas being a temple-based, land-based religion, losing the land and losing the temple, they had to create a series of what we call in Hebrew zechers, remembrances, so that as we went out into exile, we'd be able to remember what our ancient culture was, so that while we were out in exile, we wouldn't lose track of what our ancient customs were. We'd be able to remember them so that when the generation arose that merited to return to the land of Israel, we'd remember how to restore our ancient customs. The period of exile is Judaism 2.0, right? Land-based, temple-based religion, Judaism 1.0. From the year 70 up until the year 1948 was Judaism 2.0, right? And once we returned to the land of Israel in 1948, and once again became a sovereign nation in our indigenous Holy Land, that began the period of Judaism 3.0, where all of the things that we've been doing as a remembrance for the last 2,000 years can be restored to their original form. And my work in Beged Ivri, those of you who are familiar with my work of the last, 40 years, Beged Ivri, Beged means garment, Ivri means Hebrew, Beged Ivri, Hebrew garments, Israelite garments, was the first project that I took from thought to physical reality to restore our ancient Israelite garments. My work of the last 3+ decades has been researching and restoring ancient Israelite customs, taking what we've been doing as a zecher, as a remembrance for the last 2,000 years, researching it, restoring it, putting it back out on the streets of Jerusalem, and now that we're back in the land, we don't have to do it as a zecher. We don't have to do it as a remembrance. The remembrance was so that while we were out in exile, we wouldn't forget what our ancient customs were. We'd remember them so that when we had the ability to come back and restore them, we'd remember how to. So the first project that I took from thought to physical reality was to restore our ancient dress, the fulfillment of the commandment of tzitzit from the book of Numbers, where we're commanded to put fringes on the corners of our garments throughout our generations. How did we fulfill that in exile? We wore a little undergarment that we hid underneath our Gentile apparel, and when we would meet secretly behind a locked door in the morning for a prayer service, we'd wrap ourselves in a piece of cloth big enough to be considered a garment, known as the talit, or the talit gadol, the large talit, the prayer shawl, right, that everybody's familiar with, the Jewish prayer shawl, right? Our ancestors didn't have an undergarment that they hid underneath Gentile apparel. They didn't have an artificial prayer shawl. We wore our fringes as a beautiful outer garment. So my first project that I took from thought to physical reality was to restore our native Israelite dress, so that those of us who return to the land, we can begin to dress and look like we live here. The second project we took from thought to physical reality was to restore our ancient marriage ceremony. You're all familiar with Jewish weddings. We get to a Jewish wedding, we stand under a chuppah. Very often they use a talus. They use a flat cloth. But a chuppah in the land of Israel was never a talus. It was a kippah. It was a dome made of pure crimson silk with fine beaten gold work, and it stood on intricately carved poles. It was known as the chuppat chatanim. And we would crown our brides with a Jerusalem of gold bridal crown, and we would carry the bride on a royal wedding litter that's first described in the book Song of Songs, chapter 3, verses 9 and 10, where it describes the wedding litter made for King Solomon's wedding. And since 1992, we've been doing biblical weddings throughout the Holy Land. The third project we took from thought to physical reality was to restore the holy Shekel, book of Exodus, chapter 30, verses 11 till 16, where God commands each of us to give as an atonement for our soul back to God half a shekel of the holy shekel, which weighed 20 gerah, right? Like today on Purim, we have a custom of giving a $50, a half mark, a half franc, a half ruble, zecher lamachzit shekel, in remembrance of the half shekel, right? To keep the remembrance of it alive during the 2,000 years of exile, so that when we got back to the land, we'd know how to restore it to its real form. And project by project, we restored the tribal flag of Levi. We restored Luach HaMelech, the king's calendar, the first third temple era calendar ever created, right? Project after project, taking the commandment that we fulfilled in its exile form as a remembrance, researching it out, restoring it, putting it back out on the streets of Jerusalem, and that's Judaism 3.0, right? Taking the exile form of Judaism and bringing it back to a land-based, temple-based religion.
Now tell me this. So you mentioned that people used to wear their the talit katan underneath their clothing. Why was it worn underneath as opposed to over top, like you mentioned it should be done?
Because in the year 138, Hadrian, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, forbade under penalty of death, forbade us from fulfilling the commandment. So in order not to get killed, in order to remember the commandment, right, with both fingers up in quotation marks, in order to remember the commandment, right, we created a little four-cornered garment, and we attached the fringes to it, hid it underneath our Gentile apparel, so that we can remember the commandment. But because it says you shall put fringes on the corners of your garments throughout your generations, and it's stretching the imagination to consider the talit katan, the little undergarment, a garment. A garment's something you put out in public, you put on and go out in public and consider yourself dressed. Nobody would wear a talit katan out with nothing else on and consider themselves dressed. So at the time that we developed the talit katan, the small talit, we developed what became known as the talit gadol, or the large talit, so that when we would meet secretly behind a locked door, we could wrap ourselves in a piece of cloth big enough to be considered a garment, because the talit gadol, the large prayer shawl, it's big enough to cover your torso. You can wrap yourself up in it, right, and consider yourself dressed. And that was the beginning of the custom of wearing the undergarment in the year 138.
I got you. Okay, so
that's like that's like 3 generations after the destruction of the temple. The temple was destroyed in the year 70, 68 years later, or 68 years later, 68 years later, Hadrianus, the Hadrianic decrees after the Bar Kokhba revolt, right? Because the Bar Kokhba revolt was 135, to 138, and at the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt, which we also lost, Hadrian decreed that it was forbidden under penalty of death and fulfilling the commandments, so we couldn't wear our tzitzit out anymore.
So this may be different than what some folks think, where they think that what we do now as remembrances were the actual things that were being done back then, but they are just remembrances. They are not the actual practices. Can you explain the difference there?
Well, yeah, that's Judaism 2.0. That's doing the best you can with what you got. Like when you're in exile, like for instance, when I travel, right? For 35 years, I've been doing lecture tours, and I've spent many a happy evening in North Carolina with you guys, right? And traveling around, in fact, sometimes a flight would land in Europe, and people would tell me, you can't dress like this because I don't own any clothes that look like what you're wearing. I only have biblical garments. I only have begedy-free, right? So all my garments have fringes on them. People say, "Oh, you can't. They'll kill you in the streets here. You can't walk around France like that. You can't walk around England like that." America's different. America, you can get away with almost anything dress-wise, right? But I look pretty kooky over there in America, walking around like I do, In fact, that's how did Mike and I meet each other, right? He's here in Israel, right? Dressed like he just stepped out of the Bible, right? And somebody said, "Oh, you know Reuven Prager?" And he didn't. That's how we met, because we both dress alike.
Oh, really? Wow.
That's how it started. Yeah. So, while we were in exile, we did what we could, like when the temple was destroyed and we went out into exile, we didn't want to lose, like every other nation that was destroyed thousands of years ago, they're gone. They're gone. The Greeks are gone, the Romans are gone, everybody's gone. Not the Jews. Why? Because we took our culture, we took our customs, and we reformulated them to survive the exile, so that we wouldn't forget our customs, right? So we instituted a series of remembrances. Everything we do in contemporary Judaism, what you're just asking about just now, what everybody is familiar with, quote unquote, right, of Judaism, we formulated a series of remembrances so that while we were out in exile, we'd be able to remember what our ancient customs were, so that when the generation arose that merited to return to the land of Israel, we'd remember how to restore our ancient customs to their real form.
Now you mentioned...
And what I'm doing, what my work of the last several decades has been, is researching and restoring to the real form those things that we did strictly as a remembrance while we were in exile. Does that make sense to you?
It does. Now tell me about tzitzit. So tzitzit, somewhere white, somewhere white and blue. What's the difference? Where do we get the blue from? Tell us the whole story of where tzitzit come from and what they're intended for.
So in the book of Numbers, we're given the commandment of tzitzit. It says, you shall put fringes on the corners of your garments throughout your generations, and you shall put on the fringe of each corner a ptil tchelet, a twist of blue. So one of the strands of the fringes has to be blue. And it has to be not just Crayola crayon blue. It has to be a particular blue from a particular dye source. And when we lost our presence in the land and we lost the temple, we lost our source for that particular blue dye. So while we were out in exile, we remembered the commandment of fringes with just the white fringes on either the undergarment or the prayer shawl, the artificial prayer shawl. And in 1887, one of the great sages of Europe, Rabbi Gershon Henoch Kleiner, from the city of Radzin in White Russia, he left his village, went down to the Mediterranean, and spent 3 years researching every marine source that lives along the Mediterranean coastline until he came to the conclusion that he had positively re-identified the chilazon, the specific sea creature, the mollusk, from which the dye is extracted, and he began to produce the blue dye in 1887. And then there's another group that about 30 years ago started producing a blue dye from the Trunculus murex from a sea snail that is actually the source for biblical purple. And so now, once again, we have the blue fringe. We're able to not only wear our fringes as a beautiful outer garment, but we're able to fulfill the entire commandment, including the required blue fringe. Now, the white part of the fringes is not just white. If you were wearing a green garment, you didn't wear white fringes and a blue and one blue fringe. You wore 7 green fringes and 1 blue fringe. If you were wearing an orange garment, you wore 7 orange fringes and 1 of tchelet, 1 of blue. So what you're calling whites, because today the undergarment, the talus, is basically white. In exile, that's what we wore. White, like the white undergarment, the white talus, right? But the truth of the matter is that the other 7 fringes were made from the same material and color as the garment. So if you were wearing a purple garment, you wore 7 purple tzitzit and 1 of blue. When I was in the army here, right, I get my induction notice. I show up at the army base, right? They expect me to fulfill the commandment fringes on one of these little dinky undergarments under my army uniform, right? I missed the biblical garments. So what did I do? I took all my army uniforms home, and I redesigned them into 4-cornered garments. I sewed them closed in the front, opened them up on the side. I got a religious ruling that zippers are considered open even in the closed position, right? I got khaki-colored zippers so that it wouldn't have a problem with camouflage, like the same color as the shirt, right? Khaki-colored zippers, and I tied tzitzit, my fringes, with the blue fringe on the corners of my army uniform, and I showed up at the base like I missed the biblical garments, right? So what I'm going to wear? I'm going to wear tzitzit. I'm going to wear fringes of exile in a land of redemption? No way, man. Right? I transformed all my army uniforms into biblical garments, tied fringes on the corners, showed up at the base. What did they do? They tried me for destroying army property. And I said in my defense, I said, destroyed it. I sanctified it. I make a bracha. I make a blessing on my uniform when I get dressed in the morning. And they figured, this guy's nuts. They threw me out of the army. They figured, get rid of this guy quick before he infects anybody, And I'm home for 10 days. And they'd already invested money in training me, They called me back. And they said, come back, finish doing your army service. And they ordered me to restore my army uniforms to their previous condition. And I ignored the order, and they ignored me ignoring the order. And I mustered out as a sergeant with fringes on the corners of my army uniforms. Right? Go figure.
I love it.
It's Israel. I don't know if you can get away with that in the Marines, right? The U.S. Marines. But it's Israel. What are they going to do? They cut off my head for wearing tzitzit on my army uniforms? I mean,
That's hilarious. I love that. So really, then, I didn't know that about the white. So really, the white, if I was wearing it with this gray suit that I have, I would have a continuation of the gray material that's of this suit with 1 cord of blue. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, you would spin fringes, but more likely on your light blue shirt, more likely. So you would have had, more likely that would have been your outer garment. I think it would be your shirt that would be considered your outer garment, not necessarily the coat, because you don't wear the coat all the time. But the shirt you're wearing, like when you come indoors, you take off your coat, you're still wearing your shirt. But whatever color, if that was your outer garment, that gray suit, that gray jacket, you would have had 7 gray. You would have taken the fibers of that suit material and spun tzitzit, spun fringes from it, right? And made 7 gray tzitzit and 1 of blue. Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. And here's another question that often comes up. I'm thinking that Hanukkah it gets the attention of the world, that a lot of people might be seeing something like this for the very first time, Torah observant Christian people, for lack of a better term, and they see the tzitzit and they think, I want to follow Yehovah's ways, I love this. Who can wear tzitzit? Who is not intended to wear tzitzits? Are there any rules as far as that goes?
Well, it depends who you're asking. If you're asking Al Pi Torah, according to Orthodox Judaism, Jews are supposed to wear tzitzit, just Jews, because it's a commandment for the Jewish people. You know, but there's a lot of people out there that want to identify with the commandments. You know, I figure it this way: I'd rather see a Gentile wearing tzitzit than being an anti-Semite beating up a Jew.
Good point.
You know what I'm saying? If you love God so much and you love His Torah so much and you want to identify so much, you know, with fulfilling God's path, you know, what God wants, as a non-Jew, you know, the reason there is a law in the books that it's forbidden to sell fringes to a non-Jew, because there was a period in history where a non-Jew would dress up as a Jew to gain his confidence, and then would rob him and kill him. Right? Like in the old days, from between shtetls in the old country. Right? A guy's got a cart and a donkey or with an ox or whatever. And he's going down the road, and the Jews, you know, hitching and ride. He's got his thumb out. He's hitching and ride, and he sees a guy sitting up there on the agala, on the wagon, and the guy's dressed and he's got tzitzit on. And the Jew looks at him and he goes, landsman, you know, I could feel safe with him. And he gets up on his cart, and then the guy goes and kills him and robs him, whatever it is, right? So they promulgated a law that it's prohibited to sell tzitzit to a non-Jew so that they don't do exactly that, right? That's different than a guy that's got his heart, you know, like yearning to fulfill God's, to get so close to God, you know, that he wants to fulfill commandments that he's not even necessarily obligated to do. But he wants to get closer to God. He doesn't feel he can get close enough to God without doing that. You know, what can I tell you?
Right.
And also, you know, that's according to Jewish law. And this is not a Jew, so he's not basing his life according to Jewish law. If he takes upon himself, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. So now let me ask you this: so with just a basic Torah observant believer in Yeshua who wants to say, "Hey, I love what Reuven is doing." Now you still make tzitzit, is that correct? Can just anyone go on your website and order some tzitzit? Is that how that works?
Yeah, I don't check people's circumcisions when I take an order. You know. Yeah, I'm happy to fulfill orders. Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I wanted to give you an opportunity to say something about this, because you were doing us a great service coming on for this Hanukkah program. Thank you. You're giving Michael Rood some more time to heal. Before the cameras came on, we talked about how he had had a stroke a year or so ago, and he's still recovering nicely. And we're very appreciative for you to come on and do this program. So first of all, we want to support you as well, because in a lot of ways, the U.S. and Israel and a lot of countries are kind of cut off from each other right now. We need to come together, and this is a great way to come together. And so I would encourage anyone who's watching this to, if you are interested in getting some tzitzit from Reuven, to get them. And Reuven, where can they go, first of all, to get the tzitzit? And then we'll get on to a different topic here.
My website, begetivri.com. You'll post it up there on your screen there.
Absolutely, at the bottom of the screen. All right, great. So, okay, thank you for that. Now, something else you're doing is the Holy Half Shekel. Now, tell us, what is the purpose of the shekel? Where does it come from? And why are we reintroducing it now? Maybe just take us through the whole thing here.
All right. First thing to remember when we're speaking about the shekel, anywhere where the Torah speaks about shekels, it is never, ever referring to money. The shekel was not a currency, it was a weight. During the time of the Bible, there was no such thing as coins. There was no paper money, right? When Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah for a burial site in Hebron, he didn't whip out a wallet and count out 400 shekels. They took 400 shekels of silver nugget or silver bars and weighed them against stone weights. A shekel is broken down into 20 gerah. The same way that an ounce is broken down into grams, GR, the shekel is broken down into gerah, GR. There are 31.105 grams to a troy ounce, like a gold or silver ounce, or 28 grams to a regular, tomatoes and cucumbers ounce, right? And the shekel is broken down into 20 gerah. There are 20 gerah to the shekel. So when it says that everybody shall give as an atonement for their soul back to God, half a shekel of the holy shekel, what they did during the entire period of the tabernacle, the entire period of the first temple, and 100 years into the second temple era, was they would weigh 10 gerah worth of silver nugget against stone weights. And Israelite weights were always made out of stone, never out of metal, because stone cannot contract or impart ritual impurity. And since what you're giving over to the Holy Temple had to be given over in a state of ritual purity, the weights themselves that you weighed your silver nugget against had to be made out of stone or glass. Glass is exceedingly rare. I've been collecting First Temple period weights for over 28 years. I've never seen one glass weight, but I've seen many. Like I have a almost complete collection of First Temple era stone weights, right? That I would show on my lectures. In fact, I encourage you guys cut a DVD of my lecture, and I encourage everybody to buy that from you. And in that DVD, you'll see the whole collection of stone weights from the First Temple period in that DVD that's available through your library, right? So during the entire period of the tabernacle, the entire period of the First Temple, and 100 years into the Second Temple era, the way that we fulfill the commandment of giving the machatzi shekel, giving the holy half shekel, was by weighing silver nugget against stone weights, and then giving that silver nugget over to the temple agents, the collectors, for the temple. And the verses, the book of Exodus, chapter 30, verses 11 till 16, where God commands each of us to give as an atonement for our soul back to God half a shekel of the holy shekel, which weighed 20 gerah. Now, in the 6th century BCE, in Persia, the concept of coinage was introduced to the world for the very first time. 200 years later, in the 4th century BC, the concept of coinage made its way to the Holy Land, introduced by the Greeks. When the Greeks conquered our area, they introduced the concept of coinage for the very first time. And from the 4th century BCE up until the year 127 BCE, we fulfilled the commandment of giving the half shekel using Greek silver shekels and half shekels, known as didrachma and tetradrachma. In the year 127 BCE, the Romans beat the Greeks. They're now the empire. And you have to keep in mind that the emperors, they had the sole right to mint silver coinage, silver and gold coinage in the empire. They allowed the different countries to mint their own bronze coins. That's why you have all the various city-state bronze coins, like from the city of Gaza and from Benias and all these different places. But the minting of gold and silver coins was strictly the prerogative of the emperor. So when the Romans beat the Greeks, and the Romans operated 2 mints in the Middle East, one in the city of Tyre, Tyre in Lebanon, one in the city of Antioch in Syria. The mint in Tyre produced Tyrian shekels and Tyrian half shekels of a 95% silver purity between the years 127 BCE and the year 19 BCE. In the year 19 BC, they closed the mint in Tyre and moved it to Jerusalem. And from 18 BCE up until the year 65, the Tyrian half shekels were minted in Jerusalem specifically to fulfill the commandment of giving the half shekel, and they were identical to the Tyrian shekel with the addition of a Jerusalem mint mark that looks like an English KP. They're Greek letters, comma, rho, but it looks like a KP, and I hold it's the world's first kosher symbol, and it stands for kosher for Purim. That's a joke. Kidding. All right. In the year 65, we rebelled against Rome, and our first act of rebellion was to make our own independent coinage. And from the year 65 up until the year 70, from the year 65 up until the year 70, we minted our own independent Jewish shekels, dating those coins Shin Aleph, Shin Bet, Shin Gimel, Shin Dalet, Shin Hey, the years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the liberation of the land of Israel. And then we lost the war, the temple was destroyed, and that was the end of that. We continued to give the half shekel up until the year 82, when Hadrian stopped it altogether, and that was the end of the half shekel for the next close to 2,000 years. In 1998, we restored the custom of giving the holy half shekel for the first time in 1,927 years. And we began minting coins in 1998, dating the first year's coin Shin Nun, the year 50, because 1998 was the 50th year of Jewish sovereignty over the Holy Land, and that's the way Israelites date our coins. And every year since 1998, for the last 24 years, we have been minting a pure silver holy half shekel, featuring on the obverse of the coin every year a different front and a different back, featuring a vessel that somebody has already restored to physical reality for the Third Temple era. Not a wannabe or a wish list, but something that some group, the Temple Institute, Beged Ivri, Harari Harps, anybody who has restored a vessel for the Third Temple era, a usable photographable vessel, something that we could photograph and point to, right? We've featured on the obverse of the coins. So these coins can be used not only to fulfill the commandment, but also to reintroduce all the various vessels that have been restored by all the different temple organizations in preparation for the Third Temple era. That, standing on one foot in a nutshell, is what we've done. I can go on a little further. In the temple, there were 13 chests for the collection of funds. 2 of those chests were specifically for shekels. One chest was called new shekels, and one chest was called old shekels. The chest for new shekels was for the coins that you were donating this year on Purim. Purim is the day that you give the half shekel. That's why today we give on Purim a half ruble, a half dollar, a half mark, a half franc, zecher lemachatzi shekel, in remembrance of the holy half shekel. Now we give a real half shekel, a real holy half shekel, to the Beis HaMikdash, to the holy temple. Those go into the chest for new shekels. There's a second chest called old shekels. Old shekels were for makeup years, for years in the past that you had not had the ability to fulfill the commandment. You can now buy back the years that you missed in the past by depositing coins into the chest for old shekels. In addition to that, we set up a program called Machatzi Shekel L'Chayal, a holy half shekel for a soldier. The half shekel is a soldier's commandment, right? Of all the commandments in the Torah, they all begin to be fulfilled as responsible adults at bar mitzvah, age 13 for the boys, bat mitzvah, age 12 for the girls, except for the holy half shekel. The holy half shekel we begin to give only at the age of 20. Why the age of 20? Because the age of 20 was the age of induction into the army during the time of the Bible. So we set up a program so that everybody out there, can sponsor a soldier in the Israel Defense Forces where you buy a holy half shekel and we give it for free to a soldier so they can use it to fulfill the commandment. And that you can fulfill by way of our website, shekelidf.org. That'll also appear on the bottom of your screen. I don't even know if you need the wwws, but shekelidf.org. And you can go and you can buy, you can sponsor one soldier or 5 soldiers, or as a community, you can sponsor an entire army base. You buy the coins, we hand them to the soldiers for free so that they can use those coins to fulfill the commandment of giving the holy half shekel, which is a soldier's commandment. There you go.
So now Hanukkah,
questions.
Yes, well, Hanukkah is all about the rededication of the temple. Of course, it happened in the Maccabean era, and now with the third temple coming, do you see a new Hanukkah, as it were, coming about? I mean, how do you see this playing out? What's going on in Israel? Is there a third temple coming, or is this?
I just spent an hour talking about it.
Indeed, you did. Indeed, you did.
Yeah.
So this is a real thing we're planning for.
This is
not
Judaism 3.0.
Yeah.
Judaism 3.0. It's Hanukkah. It's one big Hanukkah celebration. We're restoring, we're rededicating. Like even like when we restored the wedding litter, the apirion, the biblical weddings, right? We went to the Bible Lands Museum and we did it on Hanukkah of 1992. We rededicated the ancient marriage ceremony on Hanukkah at the Bible Lands Museum in Jerusalem. Hanukkah. Judaism 3.0. That's it.
Beautiful. So this is not, as some would speculate, that this is the third temple is a figurative thing. It's not meant to be physical. We're talking about a real temple in Jerusalem, are we not?
I had somebody that paid me to come to a Catholic conference, right, and stand behind the table and just shake people's hands and go, "Hi, I live in Jerusalem." They don't believe Jerusalem even exists. Like it's in the stratosphere. It's in the, like, yeah, of course it's real. What do you think? I mean, what have we been like fighting and dying for here? To hold on with every inch of our lives to hold on to our holy land here. This is real. This is real. It's not pie in the sky make believe. I mean, that's the way the story goes.
So what do you hope, or what do you see, like in the last couple of years? Has there been some progress? I mean, here in the States, we don't see much about that there. You're right there seeing it as it happens. How close are we? I mean, is this making progress?
Well, let's put it this way. 80 years ago, they were feeding my people into ovens in Europe. And 80 years later, we carry our brides through the streets of Jerusalem, crowned with the Jerusalem of Gold bridal crown on a royal wedding litter to the accompaniment of shofar blowers and harpists. Now, how close are we? We're given a holy half shekel. How close are we? We have our blue back in our fringes. How close are we? We're not hiding our tzitzit under Gentile garments out of fear of death from fulfilling the commandments. We're wearing them as a beautiful outer garment. How close are we? Man, I mean, I serve as a Levite on duty, right? I'm not a prophet, but, like I'm in the thick of it. How close are we? We're here. We're doing it. It's exactly, it's happening right now. Beautiful. This is it. This generation's watching it happen. Or making it happen.